The next question that we've got coming up is another one that came through, and it's kind of related to that global surgical package again. This was a question that came through and said, our provider billed with a modifier 24 with a diagnosis code for trigger thumb only. Does this justify modifier 24? Is it significant enough to warrant payment of an E&M within the global period? Really what this question came down to is, what do we have to use that modifier 24? How do we clearly indicate in the documentation that the service is unrelated to the surgery that they're coming in for? And the answer to this question is the documentation is key. So the scenario that they gave, and don't scroll down yet, whoever's driving, but in a minute we'll scroll down and look and see that the surgery that the patient had was for a shoulder. They had a shoulder replacement or a repair of some sort. But while they were in for their post-op visit, they said, oh, by the way, I have this trigger thumb that, if you don't know what trigger thumb is, their thumb kind of gets stuck like this, and you can get trigger finger, all those types of things. But this patient said, I have trigger thumb that you treated before, and it's starting to give me trouble again. So the physician put trigger thumb down as their E&M diagnosis for an unrelated encounter, put the E&M code on, and put a 24 modifier on it, and said, okay, I want to send it out separate from their post-op. And the question that the coder had was, all right, is that enough? Is just a separate diagnosis alone? And my answer is a separate diagnosis alone is not sufficient. What it comes down to is the documentation. So if we can scroll on a little bit further, the thing that I recommend using is what I call a bucket analogy. And this is the way that E&M and separately reportable things were taught to me when I first started working as an auditor and looking at some of these things. And the physician that I worked under said, okay, if you have a patient coming in for a post-operative visit and you're trying to figure out if something is reportable in addition to that post-op visit, take their documentation, make a copy of it, and highlight everything that's related to the post-operative care, everything that they would normally do as routine workup post-op, everything they checked, motion, the history around it, all of that. If it's not related to that surgical care, don't highlight it. Then you look at everything you have left that's not highlighted, or some people highlight it in a different color, and see if you have enough to justify a separate E&M service, right? It's two buckets, because if you put it in the post-op bucket, you can't use it for the separately reportable. You can't double dip. It has to be completely separate. Most of the time what I find is my docs that are doing this, they have tons of stuff that's related to the post-op care, and they might have a couple of things that are separately reportable, related specifically just to, in this case, the trigger finger. Oftentimes, they have a hard time getting above a 99212 or a 99213 for an established patient in the office with that modifier 24. But it all comes down to the documentation. Yes, a separate diagnosis is going to support it from a medical necessity perspective. Right? They're not here for their shoulder, they're here for their thumb now. So that kind of supports me from a medical necessity perspective, but you've got to have the documentation to back it up to show that you went above and beyond what you normally would have done for the post-op on the shoulder. So if we can scroll on, I actually put in what this person that sent in the question said the documentation contained. And what I did is I put a strike through the things that in my opinion would have been related to the shoulder. Right? They're here 60 days post-op. They're also doing their physical therapy, but oh, they mentioned that they have trigger thumb injected 16 months ago and it's starting to bugger. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with the shoulder, right? We did an exam of the shoulder, that's all post-op, but the triggering is noted in the right thumb. So we did look at the thumb. When we scroll down a little bit farther, they go on and say what they told them to do in follow-up for the shoulder, right? They're here for the rotator cuff repair. Here's what we did. We did a trigger thumb injection, 16 months ago. She's still off work. That's all related to the shoulder. And then we said, okay, we gave her options for what she could do for this thumb. We gave her a prescription for medication. We told her to come back in a month. Now, my only issue here is the day pro that they prescribed. He doesn't really make it clear, is that for the thumb or the shoulder? So it's going to be for both. Well, would he have already prescribed it for the shoulder? If so, do we count it or do we not? So it comes down to looking at this, and whether we count that prescription or not, basically, because we say we're going to do a cortisone injection if she comes back, it's a new problem. At most, I probably would have been able to get a 99212 out of this one because we only looked at one body system. We only had one element of history. I mean, you're not going to get very high in your level of E&M. But it all comes down to the documentation. So the diagnosis alone is not enough to use that modifier 24 to unbundle something from the global surgical package. So that's kind of a recap of the question that came through.